Passive voice, past perfect tense and singular form. Use passive voice when you do not know the doer of the action. The key had been lost. The test had been taken. The book had been read. The song had been sung. The ticket had been sold. The record had been kept. The email had been sent. The photo had been taken. The idea had been shared. The house had been built. The car had been washed. The bag had been packed. The box had been packed. The letter had been written. The test had been graded. The dish had been cooked. The picture had been taken. The goal had been scored. The repair had been made. The order had been placed. The room had been booked. The form had been filled out. The puzzle had been solved. The plant had been watered. The dish had been washed. The room had been cleaned. The ticket had been booked. The goal had been achieved. The file had been backed up. The lesson had been taught. The course had been offered. The game had been played. The step had been followed. The invitation had been sent. The clothes had been worn. The task had been assigned. The book had been borrowed. The message had been sent. The file had been organized. The goal had been achieved. The ticket had been booked. The plan had been executed. The project had been initiated. The data had been analyzed. The task had been delegated. The purchase had been made. The plan had been executed. The project had been initiated. The data had been analyzed. The benefit had been provided. The update had been shared. The option had been explored. The activity had been planned. The result had been published. The item had been packaged. The error had been corrected. The task had been delegated. The error had been corrected. The update had been shared. The ticket had been booked. The lesson had been taught. The file had been backed up. The goal had been achieved. The room had been painted. The item had been packaged. The option had been explored. The option had been explored. The activity had been planned. The request had been fulfilled. The email had been received. The course had been offered. The project had been initiated. The class had been attended. The update had been installed. The movie had been watched. The decision had been made. The problem had been solved. The delivery had been made. The plan had been executed. The question had been asked. The purchase had been made. The show had been cancelled. The project had been finished. The update had been shared. The data had been analyzed. The error had been corrected. The task had been delegated. The update had been shared. The data had been analyzed. The task had been completed. The report had been reviewed. The window had been cleaned. The dance had been performed. The instrument had been tuned. The message had been deleted. The document had been signed. The chore had been completed. The challenge had been faced. The error had been corrected. The purchase had been made. The report had been generated. The benefit had been provided. The purchase had been made. The option had been explored. The activity had been planned. The issue had been addressed. The contract had been signed. The result had been published. The survey had been distributed. The report had been generated. The employee had been trained. The meeting had been recorded. The student had been educated. The report had been generated. The message had been archived. The result had been published. The student had been educated. The survey had been conducted. The procedure had been followed. The meeting had been recorded. The review had been conducted. The campaign had been launched. The resource had been allocated. The initiative had been launched. The procedure had been followed. The record had been maintained. The meeting had been conducted. The document had been scanned. The survey had been distributed. The procedure had been followed. The employee had been trained. The survey had been distributed. The message had been archived. The strategy had been developed. The message had been received. The computer had been upgraded. The task had been accomplished. The decision had been discussed. The meeting had been scheduled. The decision had been implemented. The product had been manufactured. The suggestion had been considered.